Hi there. My name is Eva Baum, and I sit within the Policy and Insights practice here at Economist Impact, the division of the Economist Group dedicated to using original, independent research to raise awareness and enable action on the biggest issues facing our global community. It's a pleasure to be with you all here today, and I want to thank you all for joining us to talk about a central pillar in any conversation about sustainability: water. As we all know, access to clean, safe water is a human right. Yet by 2025, two-thirds of the global population will live in water stressed areas. That, coupled with growing populations and increasing urbanization, results in an increasing demand on our existing water resources, while a changing climate and aging infrastructure threaten supplies. Knowing the magnitude of these water challenges that we face, the question is, how can we proactively take action to mitigate key risks and identify concrete solutions to ensure clean, safe water for all, both today and tomorrow? To discuss these questions and more, I'm joined here today by a panel of water leaders from international business communities across the globe. I'll briefly introduce each speaker, and then we'll dive right into the conversation. To start off, we have Mr. David Croft, Global Director, of Sustainability, Environment, and Human Rights for Reckitt, a leading health and home hygiene company. He works with farmers, communities, and manufacturers internationally, alongside Reckitt's global supply chain and brand teams. Mr. Croft also chairs the Business Industry Advisory Council's Development Committee, leading private sector input to the OECD Development Committee, and is a member of the Food Ethics Council. Next, we have Alexa Dembeck, Chief Technology and Sustainability Officer for DuPont. A 28-year DuPont veteran, she's passionate about elevating the role sustainability plays in investment decisions and how DuPont can help customers achieve their own sustainability ambitions. Prior to assuming her current role, she held leadership positions in advanced fiber systems, served as Global Business Director for Corporate New Business Development, and led Central Research and Development. Next, Mr. Andre Fourie, Global Vice President, Sustainability at Anheuser-Busch InBev. In his role, Mr. Fourie leads the company's global strategy for corporate water stewardship, overseeing water risk assessment for breweries, developing responsive action plans, and designing and strengthening water partnerships. He was previously head of water and environmental value at SAB Miller and head of sustainable development at South African Breweries. So to jump right into this discussion, I'd like to start off with a question for Mr. Croft. From your perspective at Reckitt, why is it essential to make sure we're talking about water scarcity, water resilience, as we think about solutions to and take action towards the climate crisis?
Thank you, Eve, and it's good to be here today. From Reckitt's point of view, as a health, hygiene, and nutrition organisation globally, we see the immediate connection. In fact, probably the increasingly obvious and greater pressure that's coming from climate change on people's health, their lives on a day-to-day basis. And the most obvious example of that is probably, I think, water scarcity. How it touches, as you were saying in your introduction, millions of people already, and how it will continue to grow as a challenge for the world, touching billions over the next few years. And that's true when we look across the 180 or so countries that Reckitt works in, and when we're looking to try and create solutions to strengthen people's health, to underpin health through powerful and strong hygiene, and also to build nutrition for the long term for people's health overall. And that water scarcity is increasingly obvious to us as a challenge. And so when we look at how we go about that, both reducing water use and developing more sustainable water resources as an industry, but in communities where we work, has to be a priority. But it's not just about using less, it's being holistic in our approach. It's using less, it's recycling more water, it's innovating and designing for low water footprints at a product and at a value chain level. It's building catchment area approaches that are both multi-stakeholder and yet also community-centric, so that we create buy-in and scale for support that translates to community-level impact. And from a Reckitt point of view, part of our role is to build that sustainable value chain approach. Part of our role is to work within product innovation to drive that. But also, increasingly importantly, I think it's to use our position to convene within the value chain, to convene across catchment areas, so we get a much more collective set of activities that drive activity on water at scale. It's not enough for one site to be water neutral. The whole catchment area and users within it needs to be taking a similar approach and be similar motivated. And so we're trying to find ways that engage people within our value chain, the communities that touch it, and even those people who are not yet in our market, so we can work with them to provide water and sanitation solutions for the future. And that equally translates to how we work with consumers over the world. I mean, at Reckitt, we put products into 20 million households every day. So being able to connect from the origins of our value chains all the way through to people using our products in their homes on a day-to-day basis is critical in how we drive water security for the future, supporting those communities and also supporting our own value chain and the people who are dependent upon it.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. Mr. Forey, I'd love to get your perspective on this too. Why is water stewardship and water protection so important within these larger conversations about sustainability? And how can multinationals like AB InBev lead this charge?
It's a pleasure joining you today. So, as the world's local brewer, it's not a surprise that water is critical for AB InBev, both in our operations and our supply chain, but also the environments and the communities where we operate. Water is absolutely essential for us in terms of the future of the company, but also the communities in terms of where we operate. So we have taken a public goal in terms of measurable impact on the high-risk communities where we operate, positive contribution in terms of water quality and availability, because we think the time is over for companies to be involved or sponsoring local watersheds. We really have to show commitment to join with others, as David said, and in partnership work towards measurable impact towards watershed health. So for us, that is critical in terms of the external investment in healthy watersheds through coalitions. So working with the WWF, the Nature Conservancy, and other companies, we're increasingly finding scale in terms of investing in collective watershed improvement projects. So that could be through grey infrastructure or green infrastructure, but also working with the local authorities to make sure that the local community has access to water and that there's a sustainable solution going forward. We see a huge role for innovation in water. We think the water sector has shown less innovation than others in the climate debate, and there's enormous opportunity, yes, for using less water and also for reusing water. We think these are going to be critical for industrial companies going forward in terms of reducing the water that we actually consume in those local communities. But we have to also look at watershed investments in terms of better impact at scale, but also how we measure and track the progress. So, for instance, using digital satellite technologies to track how water is being used or being wasted or being restored in a particular catchment. So to us, a holistic approach is essential. We can't do it on our own, not as a company, not as an industry, and even the whole private sector cannot do it on its own. We have to work with public authorities. We have to work with NGOs and local communities in terms of working towards watershed health. The last way, just by way of introduction, is the importance of agriculture. Worldwide, agriculture consumes a disproportionate part of water being withdrawn. And it's absolutely essential that we collaborate with the agricultural sector to make sure that we reduce the water use and also consider carefully the priorities in terms of which crops in which areas are essential, and then make sure that we reduce the water that we use for those crops, but also keep in mind that it's essential that those crops be grown in a holistic manner. So you can't just say, let's reduce the water, absolutely precise irrigation, and then you don't recharge the aquifer. So it's important to think about it in a holistic way.
Thank you. And Ms. Dembeck, over to you. Why is it essential, again, that water remains part of this conversation, and how is your company taking action towards sustainable futures for water?
Thank you, Eve. It's great to be part of this panel. At DuPont, we absolutely believe in the importance of water for equitable, sustainable future. And I think a key piece of that is driving circularity of water, just like nature does. So we believe that there are four key priorities that, just like the other panelists already commented, these all require stakeholder engagement, but stakeholder engagement on steroids. So the first one is water optimization through a circular lens. And that priority, particularly in industries like the semiconductor industry, which needs high volume of high purity water, or the textile industry, whereby a circularity concept with also reuse of valuable resources within the water is critical. So for DuPont, enabling that drive towards circularity in industrial wastewater. The second one, as was already indicated, is innovation. Sustainability and innovation absolutely go together. And for DuPont, it's the innovation in the underlying water technologies. So, reverse osmosis membranes that limit biofouling, the latest in ion exchange membranes, which allow for industries to take water reuse to the next level. So, again, innovation is critical, and it's the hallmark of DuPont. The third one is making sure that we can optimize water through a common set of indices. So, in partnership with the Economist Impact, DuPont has worked together to make sure that at a city level, there are decision tools for regulators, for policymakers, for cities on informing what are those measures and how to learn and drive best practices from more than 50 cities around the world to be able to say what local action can be taken to invest in the next steps and to do it with high return. So I think locally, it's really important to drive those changes. And then the fourth priority is absolutely thinking about an equitable approach and how together in areas like the Water Resilience Coalition or water.org, we can make sure that we're working in communities, working to drive equitable, safe innovation and safe outcomes, again, in strong partnership with each other.
Thank you. Your point on collective action brings me to my next question, which is, as we face these ever increasing pressure on our water resources, what are some tangible ways to foment the type of cooperation and collaboration among various stakeholders and communities that we all know to be necessary if we are to take this action towards mitigating water scarcity and increasing access to water? Perhaps, Mr. Forial, I'll ask you to respond first.
I think it's essential that we take leadership in terms of collective action on the ground as the private sector, of course, working with others. I'll start with an example in Guadalajara in Mexico, where we have an operation which faces water stress. We've worked through the Beverage Industry Environmental Roundtable, which is a collective of global beverage companies towards sustainable development, to make sure that we start a collective process. So there you have companies who compete in the marketplace. So AB InBev, but also Bacardi, Brown-Forman, Beam Suntory, Diageo, all these companies coming together and say, this is pre-competitive. It's in our common interest to invest in a healthy watershed. So by investing in ecosystem restoration, recharge of the aquifer, you have a group of companies coming together. And I think we need to show more leadership like this. We have not enough examples where we have peers and competitors in the same coalition to invest in tangible outcomes. So for us, we see the future. We believe beer has to contribute to a future which is inclusive, local, and natural. So inclusive, it has to be with others and with the local community. Local for us, in the end, beer is always local. It tends to be local barley, local hops, local water brewed locally. And natural, for us, beer is a natural value chain, but also making sure that we work with others in restoring nature and conserving it to make sure that we have water to share into the future.
Thank you. Mr. Croft, you also spoke to the importance of ensuring that community voices are captured in these decision making processes. Could you give some examples of how you do that and how other companies can follow suit?
Yes, thank you, Eve. I mean, I think let's think. Let me think about this at two distinctly different parts of the value chain. First of all, where we're manufacturing, and in a site like Hosur in India, it's a water stress location, one of 20 that we operate in. Our commitment to make certain that we're water neutral or water positive in that catchment area is really critical, not just for our future, but for the future of everybody dependent upon that catchment area. And that's why, on top of work we've done inside our factory gates in terms of building the technology that you heard Alexa talk about into our manufacturing operations, recycling more, harvesting more, but also thinking outside those factory gates, thinking with the community about what the long-term needs are, and then acting with partners to drive uh, reevaluation of the of water stewardship there, with people like the Alliance for Water Stewardship to help steer against frameworks that people like the CEO Water Mandate, that people like Andre are also involved in, to build a collective approach. Because, as I said in my introduction, it is no use if the only person in a catchment area is who's thinking about water stewardship for the long term is the Reckitt factory. And that's why we've worked with local partners to restore water courses, to strengthen reservoirs, to rebuild dams and so on in order to stop runoff too quickly, to help capture water within that catchment area, even through to replanting of trees to hold water in the catchment area. That has to be done in conjunction with other local businesses, but really importantly, with the local government to understand what future needs will be for that location. And at the same time, with the community themselves, with people there who are dependent on those water resources for the long term, for their very lives. And that's where connecting on that multi sector approach, public sector, private sector, civil society, to make certain that everybody's needs are considered for the long term, that capacity is built for the long term, and that the action taken is across the three sectors so that there's consistent delivery in order to meet everybody's needs. And I think that's a great example of how collaboration can come together. And for a business like ours, a global multinational business, one of our great strengths is the ability to convene and to work across those different sectors. But it's not just about the upstream conversation. It's also downstream. And that's why when we work in communities to provide better water and sanitation with, again, local government or NGOs to build sanitation programs, better water supplies, better drainage and wastewater disposal in communities, it's with the local government. It's with NGOs like water.org. It's with the community to understand their needs. And that's the only way, I think, that you can get that consistent approach that builds the long-term security of water for the future.
Thank you. Ms. Dembeck, I'd love to get your perspective on this. What have been the most useful tools in navigating these challenges between, global issues and local solutions?
Well, I agree with everything that David and Andre said. This multi stakeholder view that becomes very local, very collaborative, and outcome focused, I think it's critical. And a tool set to allow us to deliver that comes back to the City Water Index and our ability to look city by city, NGO by NGO supporting that city. How do we work together to make a difference? How can we drive with policymakers, with regulators, but then bringing in technology that can really drive change? And what we're finding is that depending on the city, there can be some very practical things that can be done, like zoning regulations that allow changes in water recycle in hotels, for example. So I think, again, very local, very collaborative, multi stakeholder, whereby we're all focused on the same outcome. I think that's the most important part of this algorithm for success. Do we agree on the outcome that we're all trying to achieve? And then all parties can come together and say, in a specific geography, What are the roles and what are the contributions that each party can make? But again, the decision tools like the City Water Optimization Index help give that foundational baseline that we can work from and then leverage concepts.
Thank you. And I think that is a great tie in to sort of opening it back up to the systems level. And I'd like to just ask this question to the group. As we all know from our different experiences, water is inextricably bound to all of these other systems, energy, food, agriculture, sanitation. How do you take, that systems level approach to navigate these complex interdependencies and ensure that water is brought along with all of these other considerations?
I'm happy to give a first idea. I think it's essential that we um, conceive of our programs and projects and interventions in a more strategic way. I think too many of us still can think of in a watershed with high risk. We need a water project. If we're in an area where there are biodiversity challenges, we need a nature-based project. Where we have packaging and waste issues, we need a community cleanup, etc. I do think we need to think about it in a more strategic, holistic, landscape-based approach, where we intervene and work with others in terms of nature-based solutions and grey infrastructure, but that also address the climate issues that are in tune with the agricultural challenges in that area, and also helps restore biodiversity and nature. So I think the more examples we have of holistic solutions locally, that also helps, for instance, either capture carbon or restore the soil balance, then I think that'll give us the opportunity to engage in some of the public debates in terms of making sure that public authorities also have policies that promote such holistic solutions.
And I'd be happy to add to Andre's comments. I think a common place of intersection is water with climate action. And from an innovation perspective, if we bring those two together, we'll get higher gain outcomes for both. So, a specific example of a recent innovation from DuPont around biofouling and how to reduce not only biofouling by changing and upgrading the reverse osmosis membrane, but it lowers the cost of the water and it improves CO2 reduction across the entire platform. So I think, again, a system level thinking on what problem are we trying to solve and how can we bring multiple lenses together to tackle that problem with biodiversity or whether it's climate.
Sorry to interrupt. I'd be particularly keen to hear about your experience with your food background as you think about your answer.
Well, I was going to say, for me, there's a number of different points, and you've heard from Andre and Alexa about how those things fit together. I think one of the challenges, oftentimes, that we face is that there's that adage of what gets measured gets done, which everybody in the private sector holds true. But what that also sometimes means is that you start to address things in a very targeted, solution-centric approach, which in many cases is very good. But to Andre's point, what that means is you start with silo activity. And sometimes that silo activity misses the interdependencies that particularly from an agricultural perspective and a food and water perspective get missed. And how do you start to make trade-offs? And that's one of the biggest challenges in the systems approach. It is the right solution, but we have to understand what the trade-offs will be. And when you start to manage water in a certain way, what the impacts might be, both positive and negative. So creating a systems approach that maps different water needs and starts to have very targeted conversations about the trade-offs that then start to exist between agriculture, between people's use of water and sanitation, for the short and the long term become really important. And then how you balance that activity across a landscape has to be part of that solution. And if you only focus tightly on the silo activity that oftentimes we have all done in the past, then I fear that the longer term future is actually much harder to get to the outcomes that we need on something like water or indeed climate change. And then my other point would be, how do you also make it personal? I was speaking recently at Climate Week in New York, and it's this connection between climate and health that starts to make um, that personal connection to people. And for billions of people, water is the first time that becomes very, very visible to them. The lack of potable water supplies, not enough water to cook with, not enough water to grow crops with. All of those things start to hit you very quickly. And once it starts to become personal, then you start to understand and start to make different choices. Until you see it in that way, until in a way you stop taking it for granted, as many of us can do, that we can go to the sink and turn the tap and water will come out. It's very difficult for us all to make some of those changes that we know we need to make. And that's why both within our value chain, within our factories, and even with people using our products, we've been trying to build awareness of how you can do that, and most importantly, why you can do that. Even to the extent of asking people to skip the rinse when they're using their dishwasher, because in water-stressed locations, that takes 40 to 50 litres of water into savings every time. And building awareness helps people to personalise it and then take action. Unfortunately, systems thinking, important as it is, can be fairly inaccessible. Making it personal then drives the system and drives the impact that we're talking about today, I think.
Thank you. And with just a few minutes left, I wanted to sort of turn it back to our other panelists. Along with what Mr. Croft mentioned here, what are some of these areas that each of you see as sort of highlights, key areas in which a targeted investment can really have the most impact on these water futures, which we are hoping to realize?
I think key going forward is to increasingly recognize the importance of water as adaptation to climate change. I think there's a lot of focus in the climate debate in terms of mitigation, and that's entirely appropriate. But we have to scale up the investment in watersheds as part of investing in nature, biodiversity, for a better climate outcome, better local community impact, better watershed security and biodiversity over time. I think that's absolutely essential that we use the climate crisis to help address the watershed challenge.
And I agree. I think we need to be bold and ambitious in how we bring these aspects together. And I think innovation for all of us is going to be at the heart of it, whether it's innovation upstream, downstream, with clients, with customers, with cities. I think that collaborative and innovative spirit is what's going to drive a solution here.
Thank you all. So we've just about reached our time. With the world motivated to take action on climate change, it's been a pleasure to speak with you all about harnessing this moment to make sure that water, a critical resource, is a central part of these plans. I'd also like to thank everyone in attendance for joining us and to please stay tuned for the next session, which will begin shortly.